I'm not going to waffle now. I'd just like to introduce, all the way from the celebrity jungle, Dr. Sam Davis.
Can you hear me? Good. It's a pretty hard act to follow all of those. You've just all been so amazing. You've left me with almost nothing to say. But I think I might have a few words. So I'm the academic. Sorry, Norm. What can I say? But if it's any consolation, I started my love of older people and aged care and people with dementia 50 years ago. I used to go to boarding school, and I said to my grandmother, I'd really like to come home on the weekends. And she said, that's fine, I have no problem with that at all. But you're going to devote half a day to community service. I don't care what you do, but you're not coming home and just laying around. So I decided I was going to volunteer at the local care home. And it was a beautiful old home overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. So like, I wasn't that hard done by. It was the south of France. So, and my experience of care of older people and people with dementia was such that it was a family. So even though there were professionals there, even the doctor would come and have a glass of wine out in the garden, and the butcher would stop by and have a chat with the residents in the kitchen. So it was very much that kind of family feel. It was a home. Now imagine my surprise a few years later when I went to Canada and found myself in a 457-bed home with 5 levels of care. So for the last 50 years, I've been searching for the opportunity to recreate my original experience and have the kind of care that we provide to all older people, and in particular people with dementia, that feeling of home and safeness and domesticity that we all seek. So I'm not so much of an academic as you might think I am. This is what I'm going to talk about. Don't all roll your eyes now with the cultural hegemony and just forget about it, because it's not as complicated as it sounds. And it appears to me that I'm going to pick up on a number of themes that everybody's talked about. Listening to everybody today has really heartened me, because the focus of everybody's discussion at some point has come back to the person. And in so many of the things that we read, that we talk about, that we learn about, the person is often forgotten. So I think it's just been marvelous today that it has actually been the focus of attention. I'm going to look through kind of the sorts of things that we're currently doing. Then I'm going to lead you into why we developed the Dementia Dynamics Toolkit, how we're using it in Australia, and how I think we need to move forward. Why is dementia suddenly on everybody's lips? Because everybody is talking about it across the globe in terms of numbers. Numbers, numbers, numbers. And I think this masks a lot of things. Because underlying all those numbers is this kind of tacit agreement that we have about the way things are. And so I'm really interested in finding out, well, why do we think those things? How do they perpetuate? Why are we still in the 21st century talking about things that we should be doing as a matter of course? And so I wanted to start by looking at some of the social institutions that we have. Politicians are jumped on the bandwagon because they're talking about how expensive it's going to be and what we need to do. Education, I have to say, coming from university, I think we've done a pretty poor job all the way around in terms of educating people to go out and work with people with dementia and support them. Economy, the economy, a man-made thing, a social construct, and yet again, it's all about the money, how much it's going to cost. Religion, I find, I won't go into it, but just to note, there doesn't have seemed to have been much conversation about people with dementia going on in that realm. And those are the fundamental things. And then we come to family. And a family, for all intent and purposes, is really a product of society in many ways. So the attitudes that families have, they get them from society. The two institutions that are outside of the norm, if you will, no offense intended, is the media and healthcare. And in the media and in healthcare, we have a language that consistently perpetuates the negativity. So I wanted to bring you some examples that I found in terms of here in the UK. And if you look at some of these, they're from different years, but they're all about, you don't hear any nice stories often. It's always the not so nice stories. This is nothing compared to what goes on in Australia. In Australia, we're talking about, the growing tsunami. And if you think about the devastation of a tsunami, how offensive is it to actually associate people with dementia and the growing numbers of people with dementia with the kind of destruction that a tsunami brings? Hundreds of dementia assaults going unreported. Dementia troublemakers, a problem in retirement home. That was in the Financial Times. But originally came out as teams to deal with feral patients. Now, this was a result of a call for submissions by the government for teams to be developed called severe behaviour dementia teams. So the government was largely at fault by choosing such a pitiful name for looking for support to beef up their dementia advisory service. The online version now says dementia troublemakers, problem in retirement home. Somehow they seem to think that that's somewhat better than feral patients, but not by much. Now I'm going to dwell on this one in particular because this is the kind of language that was in the actual article. So it talks about how the Federal Department of Social Services has put this out. And they talk about a surge of feral geriatrics with severe and often violent behaviour problems stemming from dementia. But then here, they talk about vaguely harmless people with fading memories. And then talk about the tidal wave. But what I thought was outrageous is a proportion of them are turning out to be a menace to themselves and other retirement home inmates, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Now, the average public will read these sorts of things, and the thing that probably caused the most damage, I think, was this description. When an old lady in a wheelchair is suddenly taken for a wild chase down a corridor by a severe behaviour dementia patient who has seized the handles and hurtled off at velocity, despite their own physical limitations, care staff are suddenly faced with a critical response situation requiring instant action. Now you can imagine to the general public who don't know any better what kind of an image that leaves them, never mind trying to recruit young people into aged care. So this is the basis on which these kinds of things are perpetuated. And underlying all the things that we know about dementia is this stigma and discrimination that's constantly undermining us. It violates the rights of people with dementia, particularly in terms of their citizenship, because if they're not able to control themselves as per this description, then their rights are stripped from them. It undermines personhood, because at no point does it indicate that there is a person within this context. It generates isolation, because if people are discriminated against, they don't want to come forward. They don't want to engage in society, and consequently, they isolate themselves. But it also does the most fundamental damage in the way it frames the experience of dementia as negative. And this is the biggest problem that we have. So language does matter. And we have a couple of very vocal advocates in Australia, Christine Bryden and Kate Swaffer. And I use Kate's words in particular because she's made a absolutely perfect point that if we don't change the language of the way we talk, we will never have dementia-friendly communities. We won't reduce the stigma or the discrimination, and consequently, it's going to have an impact on the way in which we provide care. And we are, in fact, in that situation where disability was some 30, 40 years ago. And yet we continue to use the same language. It can hold us back. John Killick, he's got a lovely, I don't know if any of you have seen it, he's got a lovely little book out. He wrote it for care partners, but I think care staff should read it as well. It's called Dementia Positive. It was published in 2013. And he provides that fundamental understanding in terms of how we can reinforce all those sorts of prejudices and perceptions that are out there by continually using the wrong language, that negative language. In dementia care, it's particularly prevalent in Australia. And it's not always what we say, but the way we say it and how we frame it. So because we take a negative slant to things, we often talk about, you know, it's efficient to say, George can't brush his teeth. It takes more words, but it's much more effective if you say, put the toothpaste on the brush, give the brush to George, George can then brush his teeth. But 9 out of 10 times, that effectiveness gives way to efficiency. And so all the time, we are continually then minimizing what people can do. And that's an affront to their personhood. And it also enables us then to take control and make them helpless. That's not to say that any of you are doing this, but what we find when we go out in Australia, and indeed I've been in Canadian homes and American homes as well, and we find a general pattern. And I've worked a little bit with Dawn Brooker and Myrna Downs here in the UK, and they tell me a similar story. In many ways, we are locked into that kind of institutional thinking. So all of us have attributes, right, that perhaps we're not quite so proud of. So I'd like you to think for a minute. What's the one thing, just one of your attributes, that you do not like, you've tried to change, and you've failed? Think about that. Everybody got one? We all do, don't we? Now think how you would feel if that was the first thing that people principally saw you about when they encounter you. How would you feel about that? Would you feel good? No? Think about it. If you are known as a person with dementia, what is it that the first people will attribute to you when they encounter you? That's a really important lesson that we have to learn. Now, in Australia, they did a study, and this is from Alzheimer's Australia has changed their name to Dementia Australia in recognition of the fact that Alzheimer's is just one of many different types of dementia. And they found that 59% thought that people avoided them, this is people with dementia, avoided spending time with them because of their diagnosis of dementia. 41% wished that they had more social contact with people in the community. They wanted to engage in the community. They wanted to be part of the community. 57% indicated they're afraid of becoming lost. And 48% said they had difficulty communicating with staff in stores. I've seen some of the really good work that's going on over here about training people in shops to be able to engage with people with dementia or any kind of cognitive impairment. I think that's brilliant. I'd like to bring that to Australia, holus bolus. because I think that would be fantastic. But what this tells us is that every single day, people with dementia are encountering stigma, as Norm's certainly pointed out this morning. It's a blow to it undermines their self-esteem, and it doesn't enable them, therefore, to exercise agency. So they really struggle to maintain their independence because people are consistently taking away their opportunities for choice and independence. So Christine Bryden, who I think is incredibly articulate and has, on many occasions, has had her diagnosis of dementia actually questioned, I think has become a real forefront for the voice and advocacy, just as Norm's is here. And I think this is one of the things that struck me the most particularly the last time I was talking to her. That question of who am I if I can no longer be a valued member of society? I think that's a question that we really have to think about when we're talking about people with dementia, because we tend to undervalue their ability to make that contribution. And the way she puts it here, being talked about as a demented person, a vacant, afflicted, empty shell, and all of those things. Or when we use language like absconders, wanderers, offenders, attention seekers, inmates, she articulates at the end, don't lump us all together, referring to us as they, as this loses sight of our unique individuality. So this underpins all of the stuff that I've been looking at in the last little while. And so we made a major feature of the education in the Dementia Dynamics Toolkit around language. The other thing that we talk about very much so is about the different perspectives of the people involved. And you have your perspectives of the people with dementia and their experience and what they bring to it. And then, as others have pointed out this morning, there's the family carers. They prefer to be known, certainly in Australia and in Canada, as care partners. They often don't see themselves as carers, but care partners. And they have a particular knowledge and particular attitudes that influences both the appraisal and reactions in terms of the person with dementia. The knowledge we know can be very difficult to find, but it can also be overwhelming. And so we have to be able to find a balance there to suit the individual care partner. Care partners can also find it very difficult to integrate aspects of dementia into their understanding of everyday life. They might have been married to somebody for 40 years. And so it's not part of their everyday understanding of what should happen. So, as was pointed out again this morning, people really need to know. They need more information that's going to be practical to them. They also rarely, what the research tells us, is they rarely understand it as a terminal condition. And this can be both frightening, because what they see happening is going to be endless, but it also can be a naive way of providing the support that you need to give to somebody who has dementia. But most of all, they're unprepared for the diversity of issues, because there's so much going on. And we don't do a very good job of really providing them the opportunity to kind of gather their thoughts and find out what they need in order to be able to support the person that they're going to support. There tends to be two sides. This is a continuum, but there tends to be two sides of the story. There's those who experience it as how the general society might see it. They're a shell of a person. It's no longer an adult. They become empty. And then there's the flip side, where they're saying they feel very lucky to have that time with mom. And I don't know if you know of June Hennell here. June and Katrina Hennell had the opportunity to meet them in Australia. And June was a carer of her husband. And her granddaughter, who's only 15 years old, it's very heartwarming to hear a young teenager talk in this way. We know what valuing uniqueness and personhood is because we lived it with Pops. Every person needs to be respected for who they are and the person they have always been. Now, if a teenager can say that, we certainly are in a position to move that forward. So we have those two sort of differing perspectives, the person with dementia and the family. Then we have the healthcare professionals. Now, in terms of across the board, we tend to find that time, resources, and a lack of knowledge are the three fundamental barriers that everybody talks about. That's what underpins the experience of working with people with dementia. But in terms of the community setting, what we find in the literature, certainly the research literature, it tells us that they rely very much on building relationships. And that's in order to facilitate that right kind of support. So the kinds of things that you were talking about in terms of understanding the person, you have to build the relationship with that person. That's good to hear. But they also have that emotional struggle because if they have to make decisions that are going to actually impact on the independence of that person, what they're doing is taking away something that they don't really want to do. In the acute setting, there's a different set of issues. And we find that there's a lack of confidence often in acute settings. Not just confidence, but competence as well. And they often do provide good, the kind of care with all the good intentions in the world. But because it's within the acute setting, it's in a very depersonalizing way. So you've got another set of perspectives from the healthcare professional. So you've got three different perspectives or more, depending on the diversity of culture, gender, all the other things. That's a pretty big mess to try and get all on the same page. But one thing we all have in common, and it was mentioned again this morning, so I feel like I'm just rabbiting on about things you've already been told, is person-centered care. There seems to be now a global universal agreement that person-centered care is the best approach for not just older people, not just people with dementia, but for everybody. And the problem that we have with person-centered care is very much that we can't agree necessarily on a definition. But Dawn Brooker did some work a few years ago where she took the VIPS approach, looking at all the research and coming up with these four things that consistently were mentioned with person-centered practice. So valuing the person, the individual approach, recognizing their uniqueness, the perspective of the person is actually taken seriously, and that their social needs are respected, and the social environment supports their psychological needs. So those four things, VIPS. And what does VIPS usually stand for? So in some respects, it really gives us a good fundamental starting point. So what we tried to do with the dementia dynamics is take all of these things, all of these considerations, and say, okay, we've got all this evidence. That's all well and good, but we can't get it into practice. So how can we do that? So we used a lot of different ways of doing it. And one of the things that we found was people have to reflect on things. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos now, and I'd like you to reflect on them and tell me what you think. Now.
Hello, maid Marion. Oh, she wasn't bad looking when she was young. Come on, sleeping beauty. Time to get up. You've had enough rest. Time for a shower.
I don't want to get up. I'm tired.
This'll do for today. Not much worth choosing from anyway. Come on, you have to get up. I've got 7 people to do and I don't have time to waste with you.
I don't want to have a shower. Oh, my leg's sore. I want to stay in bed. Oh, no.
Oh, isn't she done yet? It's nearly 10:30. Come on.
You have to get up now.
No, I don't. No. Get away.
So, your thoughts? Have you seen that sort of thing? Okay. Sounded more like a turkey than a person, didn't she? She hadn't been done yet. Did you see any of the VIPS in that? Okay. Any comments you want to make on that one? That's right. Sorry?
Carers should go work in a factory with council leave, not with people.
And I don't know what it's like here, but the training is very ad hoc in many places. I mean, it can be a 6-week course or it can be a year, depending on whether you go to a TAFE or a private facility. So the level of training that people go in, and it's all about the tasks, it's not about the individual for the most part. So, if I can find the next one.
I think also that nurse is having pressure from her boss, isn't she? Go on, go on, go on, go on, go on. And that undermines, she cannot act her best if she's got a manager saying, get on, get on, get on, get on, get on. And that's what causes, I think, a lot of nurses to behave like that. Not a lot, some nurses to behave like that, because they feel the pressure of you're not good enough.
Feeling rushed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got a job to do.
And that's very much an organisational thing, isn't it? Yeah. So have a look at this one now.
It's Karen. How are you feeling this morning? How did you sleep last night? Do you feel like a shower this morning?
I don't want to get up. I'm tired.
Well, why don't you stay in bed a bit longer and have breakfast in your room? And we'll hold off on the shower till later.
I don't want to shower. I had one yesterday. My leg's sore.
All right, well, let's leave the shower for today. And how about I choose some clothes in case you feel like getting up later? Would either of these be okay for today?
The blue one.
Now, about that sore leg, can you tell me which leg's hurting?
This one.
How are we going in here? It's nearly 10:30.
Yeah, Marion's feeling tired today and she's got a painful thigh. Can we organise breakfast in her room and can you assess her?
Sure. How about I'll come back in a tick, Marion, okay? And I'll have a look at that leg.
Good.
Your thoughts on that one?
Breakfast at 10:30 is a bit I mean, lunch will be at 12:30. So she's gone from, say, 8 or 9 last night, all that time without any food or fluid. But anyway, I know that's not...
Time aside, time aside.
Yeah.
Well, it's centred on that person.
So it's centred on the person. So what was it about that made it centred on the person? She gave a choice. How did she come into the room? She knocked and she introduced who she was. Anything else?
She sat on the bed. That was her level.
Yep.
Warm greeting as well.
Yep. And took her seriously. Her leg was sore.
Inclusion and engagement.
Yep. Absolutely, inclusion and engagement. Now, one of the things we get people to reflect on then is everybody says they haven't got enough time to do person-centered care. That's, that takes more time, person-centered care. The first video I showed you was 1 minute and 1 second. The second video I showed you was 1 minute and 21 seconds. So it took an extra 20 seconds to be person-centered. I think that's a pretty good investment. And it's not until people sort of start to see that they kind of get that idea of the time context and the idea that it maybe is the institution and the organization that's the problem. So then we have a final one. Oops. Where am I here? There we are.
I asked you to toilet Frank before you went on your break. Why didn't you do it?
Yeah, and what did she say?
Oh, I don't know, some lame excuse. But basically she took twice as long on her break as she should have. By the time she got to Frank, of course, he was wet.
Oh, God, she's hopeless. She's so disorganised. She takes way too long on her break and no one wants to work with her.
I know. Come on.
Morning, Marion.
They just ignore me sometimes and talk over me like I'm not even here. It's so rude. I just want to be treated as a normal person. I'm not invisible, you know.
That actress is, I don't know if any of you used to watch the Prisoner. Do you remember Prisoner? She was the nice warden, the young blonde woman. And she just recently passed away, just a couple of months ago. We went to her funeral. And that was the last piece of work that she did. And she was absolutely brilliant, let me tell you. So with that one, what do you think about that?
But she's right, it was just so rude. So rude.
But how many times do you think that, when you're busy, and you're going through, you're doing things, the task is more the issue than the person? Do you think that happens a lot? I was in the hospital a couple of years ago. Our university has a hospital attached, and I found myself in the hospital for a couple of days. And they didn't know who I was. But they found out when I was discharged, because I came back 3 weeks later and gave them a lunch hour session on person-centered practice. Because I found myself within 24 hours feeling like a non-entity with the busyness of the ward and the way in which they chucked, everything. I actually had a physio come in, an occupational therapist. I had one in each arm, and she said to me, "Can you touch your nose?" And I said, "No." And so she wrote it down. I said, "Can you have a look at me first?" And she looked at me and she went, "Oh, you can touch your nose." I said, "No, I can't." And she looked away. She didn't even say. I said, "Excuse me, but if I could touch my nose, I would. But I can't because I can't bend my arms." "Oh," she said. She was in the front row when I was doing the training. Looking very sheepish, I might add. So it's not just about age or whether you've got dementia, but it has more impact if you're older, and it has more impact if you have dementia, because unlike me, I could speak up and say something. Most people who are in that position cannot. Any questions so far?
I think another point is that if, say, you forget something and you're over 65, people assume it's because you've got dementia. If a 14-year-old forgets his PE kit, nobody says you've got dementia. But once you get past a certain age, there is this assumption that it's because there's something wrong, because you just forgot it because you were busy.
Well, and we have those kinds of phrases built in. I don't know if you have it over here, but certainly in Australia and the States, I hear people talking about having a senior moment. Makes me crazy. Absolutely makes me crazy. How am I doing for time in the break?
You're doing okay.
That's not helpful, Ken.
Sam, that was me biting for time whilst I ran my 2:15.
Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, so here's a game. I want you to play a little game with me. Name that physical environment. What's that?
House.
A bungalow, okay, house, bungalow. What's that? Fishing, holiday home. Any others? And this? Street. Okay. Respite center. Retirement village in Thailand. The greenhouses in Tupelo, Mississippi that specialize in dementia care. We all have preconceptions about the physical environment. One of the reasons why we don't seem to be able to move forward, both in terms of the building and in the social care, is that we are fixated on things that we are familiar with. And I'm just overjoyed to hear the kinds of things that Purple Angel is doing in terms of thinking outside the box about what we can do. And all the good intentions in the world. Everybody is trained, everybody, is working within new environments and new things are brought in. But at the end of the day, we are still thinking in the same box. And we need to be able to move outside that box. The greenhouses in Tupelo, Mississippi, for example, I was there in 2006. So that was quite some time ago now. And they were fairly new. They had 6 at the time, and they were replacing a 142-bed traditional nursing home in Mississippi. And they had gone with the Eden alternative, and this is the brainchild of Bill Thomas, him and his wife developed the Eden alternative, which is just one of many forms of the person-centered practice. But they also designed these homes. Now, the thing about this model, for example, is that it differs depending on where you live. So in New York City, the greenhouses are actually apartment buildings because that's what people are used to. This is the Deep South. This was a Methodist community, and they had them designed like they would be used to there, with the hearth and all the bedrooms coming off. And you can read all about it online. I won't go on about it, but it's a completely different model to the kind of thing that we're used to. The same with this. This is a retirement home that has continuing care. It's in Thailand, and it's run by Westerners. And yes, you could fish to your heart's content there. And these aren't for everybody, but it's another alternative way of being cared for in later life. And this respite home is actually attached to a care home, but this is the entrance where they come in for respite, and this can take 8 people, and the respite home beside it can take 16 people. It just looks like a bit bigger house. So again, it's a different kind of concept. It's not going to an institutional context. It's going to the same place that you would go, and see a neighbor or something like that. So we have to remember that when we're thinking about environments, we have to think about, well, what do people with dementia really need? Because we do take our environments for granted. We operate in a world of norms. It seems to me that I'm consistently offending you in some description. But operating in a world of norms, I mean, we have these sort of general averages. My brother is left-handed, and he's grown up his entire life in a right-handed world. Both my husband and I are quite short. And we live in a land of giants as far as we're concerned. Even buying a car, we can't buy one that's got a lift like this unless it goes down automatically because we can't reach it to close it. So we live in this world of norms, but we are very good at personalizing our own spaces. But we don't think about it when we're thinking about the care context. So people with dementia have some certainly things that influence how they see, how they feel, how they respond in certain environments. The short-term memory loss can cause disorientation. Their perception impairment, I mean, it does quite often change the way in which you see things. Poor concentration, and that fundamental loss of identity, your home, your environment, you get a lot of your identity from that. So even small changes can change a challenging environment into an enabling environment. Now I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
And pick up after tea. Yeah.
Okay. Super. Thank you very much for that, Sam. Welcome back. We're now in the home straight. So thank you for your attention through today. I didn't give Sam a proper introduction because I was a bit conscious of time, so I'm going to do that now. Yeah, I'm going to. So we're really privileged to have Dr. Sam Davis with us today. I'm really pleased. The way that we got to connect with Sam is that she's a relation of Hayley, who's our senior recruiter that I mentioned earlier, and so that's how all of this came about. So we're really pleased that we've got that connection, that she's able to join us here today. Sam is a social gerontologist and an experienced researcher, and has had over $4 million, is it?
Yes.
Pounds, dollars? $4 million worth of research funding into this whole arena. So we're dealing with a world expert here in aging and dementia, and it's a special privilege for us to be able to listen to her today. So one thing before I hand back over to Sam is Norms has asked me to ask you guys to take these little leaflets away with you. This is for his memory cafe. So if you ever want to just drop in, Norms will be there most of the time. So feel free, if you want to pick his brains, utilise it, and feel free to extend the invitation to any carers or people that you know who are living with dementia. All right, back over to you.
Thank you. So I ended up talking a bit about environments, and I just want to do a little bit more around that. On the basis of research, both from Mary Marshall in the UK and Richard Fleming in Australia, we have an evidence base for these kinds of principles in the environment, and that's unobtrusively reducing risks, provide that human scale, so that domestic kind of feel, allow people to see and be seen, which is about line of sight, reducing unhelpful stimulation, but not to the point where they're all bored and asleep around the television, of course, and optimize helpful stimulation, helpful being the operative word there, to support movement and engagement, and keeping in mind, we're talking about the physical environment here. Create a familiar space, provide opportunities for people to be alone or with others, provide links to the community, because so often people go into a care home or any kind of place that's going to separate them from the community, and they lose a lot of their community links. And it really is important for us to maintain our community links. And respond to a vision for a way of life, and that really is about the person. So on the basis of that, we do a lot of environmental audits, and I've come across a lot of things. From my perspective, the biggest problem that we have is a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Because people read these things, these principles, and they read, oh, you know, you've got to have colour. And so this is a good example of differentiating between doors. So this is a facility that has a little bays and 2 doors. And so they've actually done quite a good job in distinguishing the 2 doors with the different designs. But there are a couple of problems there. Do you see any issues? Sorry? Yep. The name is small.
Signage is too high.
And what's really interesting is they said, now we've got all the signage at eye height, just like it says in the book. And I said, oh yes. I said, who put it up? They said, our maintenance man. The man was 6'6", okay? So, and the other thing is, they've used plastic, and of course the light reflects off it. So for those of you who answered, well, I got some little prizes for you. So you gave me an answer, didn't you?
Oh, thank you.
And you gave me an answer. Who else is going to fess up? Who else gave me an answer? Sorry? Buzz Loveday. Yeah, I'll tell you about her later. Somebody else over here. Yes. There you go. There's more prizes to come. So the problem with that too is that was bedroom doors. And this is the rest of the doors in the facility. They're all the same color. So immediately you've got a problem, because if you're using color and you're distinguishing doors that they shouldn't use and doors that they should use, and you paint them all the same color, it's not going to work. My favorite, however, is this. The only blue door in the place. They clearly don't want anybody in it because they've got a lock and staff only on it, but they took the trouble to put a window in it. What kind of a mixed message is that? So, you know, you really have to kind of think these things through when you're taking this advice on. That's probably more in keeping with that kind of advice. Contrast is a real problem. Great to have a safety rail, a handrail, but if you can't see it, it is of no value. The lack of contrast between the chair and the carpet means you're in line for falls. And having this kind of, this kind of contrast is a real issue, because people with dementia are quite likely to see that as a hole that they may have to step over. So that's a real problem. The same with bathrooms. We often wonder why people can't find the bathroom and then why they can't use it when it's inside. If you think about the middle picture being how they might see it, if it's a white seat and a white toilet and a white sink, whereas these kinds of contrasts, and these are things that don't cost money, they cost very little money, and are very simple to do, and yet you often find that they're not being done. Signage is my personal bugbear, because I tend to find that whether it's a hospital, a residential aged care home, or any kind of public building, the signage is there for the organization, not for the people who use it. And when we're thinking about people with dementia, there's no point of having that kind of corporate stuff going on. If you're going to have signage, let it do its job properly. So that some of those, this one, other than the color, this was used in a rural facility where they're mostly farmers. So the idea was good, it was just the contrast of colors wasn't quite right. The other thing is signposting and wayfinding. Somebody mentioned wayfinding this morning. Even within a facility where you're spending most of your time, you still need to have wayfinding opportunities. And that can be actually put in without having too much thought about it, as long as it's consistent. So here we have a toilet, albeit not well signed, but these flowers and this can be seen from quite a long way away. And so it's a sign that there's the toilet there. And keeping in mind that people with dementia are not stupid, and they may forget, but that doesn't mean to say they can't learn. So they do learn these kinds of things, and it makes them more independent to find the toilet by themselves. This is a decision point. There's 2 corridors, so they've got clear landmarks there so that people will get used to which way they have to go. And the grandfather clock similarly. So these are simple things that you can often do with things that you've already got in the environment. This is the ubiquitous around the outside of the room look. Tacky and not effective at all. This was a good idea, but it's far too cluttered. They went for the home look, but didn't quite manage it. Going to trip over again. This is a better idea because it's smaller. So they've got a place where they can sit. They've got a place where they can eat or sit at the table. Access to a small kitchenette. And it's all within the one space. So it's easy to get around. And this is the familiar sort of dining room that you might have in the country in Victoria. And those are pictures of the local area. So it gives them that feeling a little bit more than even though it's a communal dining room, it's small tables facilitates that kind of safe feeling. We often have, this is a standard feature in most Australian nursing homes, unfortunately, the washing line. And they call them, what is it they call them? Yeah, there's a name for it though. Hills hoist, that's it. Yeah, you can call it what you like here, but everybody has one. But this path is the sign that that's the end of the road, but it doesn't take them anywhere after that, so they have to come back. So that would be better if it was slightly off to the side and the path went somewhere else to keep them going. And similarly, this is a good idea, having the raised beds, but the seating is tucked in behind, and so it's very difficult to see. It needs to be more convenient. This is one of my personal favorites. When I showed it to the CEO of the health service, they were just horrified. Beautiful design, comes out of the public area, goes around, comes back, and it goes past one of the stalwarts of Australia, the men's shed. The only problem is that somebody had a skin tear, so they took all the tools and everything out of the shed, so now they have an empty shed. So it has absolutely no interest, which is why I was able to take a picture of it, and there's nobody in it. And these are the kinds of things that happen. And if you're going to spend a lot of money on a garden and have something that's functional, then you need to make sure that it remains functional and not just a white elephant. This is an example of the kind of signage that you can do inside and out. A lot of times outside, there's no signs for a toilet. So here, what they've designed is they've got color coding so people can find the units. And they put it on the ground and the wall because sometimes people are with their walkers and they're looking down rather than up. So if they know they live in the yellow bit, they can go follow the yellow signs. And there's a nice big sign to the toilet. That's functional. Those are the functional sorts of things that you can do. Why do you think this is a good idea with the hats by the door there? Think Australia. One for you. Can you pass that back to that lovely lady? So, when I pointed out to the CEO yet again that it was a great idea, but here they have the hats here. And this is the only door in the facility that's locked that nobody can go out of. So while they might get used to the hats, I can go out, they're not going to go very far there. And they had a lot of trouble with that, people going up to the door trying to get out. So we have to be very careful when we're thinking about the environment. What do you see? What's the most notable thing about them? Long, straight corridors. 3 different places from 3 different countries. Yeah. Yeah. The only one that's marginally better is this one slightly because you can actually see there's a place to sit at the end. But there, what struck me after I was taking these was that they all, they must clone these architects for building these places because all of them seem to have these long, I've got hundreds of pictures of this sort of thing. Any comments, questions?
seats should be red.
Oh, yes.
But now they think now that people with dementia see that as a ring of fire, and that actually people with dementia won't sit on red toilet seats.
I'm not familiar with that research, but a lot of, yeah.
Yeah, I can interact with that.
Yeah.
The Purple Angel, we don't recommend that you use red. Because red, from being a child, has always been a colour of danger.
Yeah.
You know, stop, the lights, things like that, right? What we do recommend is using a colour like yellow, like you've seen on here today. That's absolutely perfect. And what we've also recommended to care homes and places like that is, if people are having trouble to eat, if you exchange your plates for a yellow plate or a yellow drinking vessel. We did this at Ashburton Hospital, NHS Hospital. I got a phone call within a week from the domestic team saying, Noams, all we're doing all day is filling those jugs up with water. Job done. Job done. Just because we changed the glass from clear glass to yellow, and just because we advised to change the jug to yellow so they can see it. So yeah, I would say stay away from red. Definitely stay away from red.
So they often think it's blood. So whereas something small and red, where we might see it in a book or something, they perceive things as blood. So they either see it as blood or as fire.
Well, I've never heard the blood or fire, but it's just red is a danger signal to most people from being very young, and we think it's common sense that you don't use red.
Having said that, though, keep in mind that colour is a very personal thing. And so what suits some people won't suit other people. And there is very little research evidence to support the use or non-use of any particular colours. What the research does show us, however, quite clearly, I mean, that's a common sense thing, absolutely. But what it does show us, for example, is that using contrast to identify things is one thing, and then if you don't want somebody to go somewhere, then you blend it in. So you're using camouflage and contrast as ways within the physical environment to help people move around in a much more effective way.
And sorry, isn't it that also with an aging eye you need twice as much light in the environment?
Well, I'm so glad you said that because that's the biggest problem that we have. And here we are. These are the kinds of things that we find are common environmental physical issues. And inadequate lighting tops the list, absolutely. I've yet to go in a place where I've measured the lighting and it's been appropriate. It might meet standards, but it's no good for older people, and particularly people with dementia, because there's a lot of research now coming out that different types of dementia impact on the eye in different ways. And so sometimes it's color, sometimes it's distortions, but most definitely we all need more lighting. So you get a prize. I'm not going to come down again. The other thing is I've lived in 7 countries in 3 continents, and I don't know about you, but I've never had a nursing station in my home. So I think fundamentally we need to think of nursing stations as something as a thing of the past, and have a more functional for staff and much less institutional for the people who live there. And all the other things are the kinds of things that I've already covered by looking at the pictures. You could have the very best physical environment in the world, but if you don't have the social environment, then you lose all the therapeutic value of the physical environment. End of story. So that people stuff has got to be there, the relationship stuff. And what we've found is that it is in fact the organizational culture that makes the difference. Because if you don't have support from the organizational culture, then you don't have empowered staff to be able to respond to the individuals. And Dawn Brooker's second version of the book that I shall be continuing to give away as well has a new chapter in it that I thought was really nice, because she talked about the organizational culture as where we have our roots and we absorb our nourishment. And I have to say, for the most part, what we're battling is the dying plant because the organisational roots aren't necessarily feeding it as well as they could. Although having said that, I've heard some fine examples today. And this is what it begins to look like. Based on our research, this is the sort of thing that we found. Fundamentally, you have that institutional dominance, that kind of organisational framework that's based on the institution. And so there's limited exposure to life stories if they have them. There's a lack of staff empowerment, which means that they feel rushed by those kind of facility routines. High levels of unmet need. The staff are much less likely to enjoy their work. They might be passionate about coming, but it gets very tedious and they get very tired and they don't enjoy it as much. There is definitely a lack of understanding of person-centered care, particularly at the organizational level. And there's a lack of person-centered leadership because you cannot, in any shape or form, have person-centered practice at the staffing levels if you don't have person-centered leadership and they treat their staff properly. So in doing the background for the actual toolkit, our first project was 7 rural residential care facilities in Victoria, northern Victoria. And what we wanted to do was build a resource from the grassroots up. So rather than us developing the education, we went in, we worked with them, we found out what worked best, we trial and errored a lot of stuff, we developed some discs, and on the basis of what we did with them over a 3-year period, we developed the toolkit. We then trialled it in 23 homes, and then we took it to the government, and they bankrolled it, so we did get funding, to do a national rollout. So we have 2,861 aged care homes in the country, and every single one of them got a copy of the toolkit, hard copy of the toolkit. We had revised the e-learning on the basis of the trials. We developed a manual because in the first project, we were there as the external support, and there's no way we could functionally do that for 2,861 homes. So we developed the website as our external support, and then we provided a manual. And we did train-the-trainer workshops nationally. I've been over every bad road in Australia, I think. And we certainly racked up the miles, that's for sure. So what the toolkit actually comprises is an e-learning DVD, which all of you can take away with you and make as many copies as you like. We share. It's standalone, so you can actually upload it to your computer, or you can actually access the whole thing via the website, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Also within the toolkit is what we call our Personalising Our Practice DVD. And this is little sort of 1-minute videos that actually ask a question, and it's about having a reflexive question. So for example, say a little bit about comfort, and the question is, how would you provide comfort for somebody in your care today? And it's a way of getting people to feed that information through to others and talk about the individual. So they've been very inventive in the way they use that. Some of them use it if they still have handover, they do it then. Others use it as reflective practice for a resident of the day or things like that. So they're building this kind of thing into their existing systems, which is the best at the moment that we can hope for. And then the other part is the manual. And all of this is online, so you can download the manual sections. And that's very much designed to help organizations put the training into practice and feed culture change along the way. So the project outcomes. So far we've had 61,000 people complete the e-learning. And that's pretty good. As far as we know, there's just over 147,000 people employed across those 2,861 homes. We had direct contact with 1,790 care homes, which we were quite pleased about, actually. We're still averaging. Now, we haven't, well, the project closed in June 2016, and we're still averaging approximately 200 people a week finishing their e-learning. So they're still going strong, even though we're not out in the field doing workshops anymore. And what we found is that there has been a shift in the institutional environment in homes where 45% or more of the staff have completed the e-learning. So that's actually a lower threshold than we thought. We thought we were recommending 60%. So we were quite pleased with that. And this is how it breaks down. What we're basing this on is 16% of the homes achieved over 80% staff completion. They're rolling it out, and some of those are big places, like we have Baptist Care, and they're rolling it out across 172 homes. And then we've got 14% of those homes that have done the recommended 60%, and 27% that have done 45% or more that have completed. Our argument is if you're going to develop person-centered practice, the more people you've got on the same page, the better. This is by no means the be-all, end-all. This is just a starting point for people to provide a cheap, flexible way of educating their staff in basic person-centered practice and having a better understanding of people with dementia in their care. It was developed for residential aged care, but we do know that people in the community are using it in Australia. Now, we use something called, you have to show the government you've spent their money wisely. So we had to take some measurements. What we used was a tool called the Individualised Care Inventory, which measures 4 components that are related to person-centered practice: knowing the resident autonomy and choice, communication between staff, and communication between staff and residents. So what I've done here to make life easier so I don't have to go through the whole scores is I converted the scores into ratios. So think of 1 as perfect. So the higher the score, the better they did. And what you can see here is the one that's improved the most is resident autonomy and choice. This is the one that tells us there's been a clear shift in the the institutional environment. Because this is the measure that asks about, are you rushed by facility routines? Do you have time to allow someone to make decisions? Do you allow time for people to do things for themselves? And those have shifted significantly. And that's very telling for us, because what it means is, based on what we got from the original 7 homes, they were presenting the same issues that have clearly been issues for all the other homes, and consequently, that's where the improvement's been, if that makes sense. This is a list I don't like, but we use it because this is the language that they use. And this was distress, so you might call it behaviours of concern, you might call it responsive behaviour. We call it responsive behaviour in the DISC, but we've since moved on from that. And here, the one that's telling for me is the drop in resistiveness to care, because that's where you're going to get that's going to make a huge difference, not just to the individuals, but to the staff as well. So all in all, we think we've done quite good. But what was fantastic about it was we gave them the material, and the homes that have used it have run with it, and they've done so many different things, and they've been feeding it back to us all the way along. So they had many different ways of implementing the education. And so some of them went back to their staff after the training and did it so these ones have done it in group training over 2 nights. We have another one that's doing it across 14 staff, and they did it in pairs so that people who weren't very good with computers could pair up with somebody who was good with computers and complete it on their own. Others have been using different ways of doing it, and they've actually printed it off so that people don't have to use the computers at all. So what I'm saying to you is what you see in the kit is just the raw bones. It's how people are then using it on the ground that suits them the best. So we've also had them where they've done it as in-house training. They've used the videos and the little interactive stuff that's in it as a framework for reflection and talking about things, and put it in the context of their own training and done it themselves. Half-hour sessions, half-a-day sessions, whatever they want. So it gives them control of using it as well. And if it's flexible and it can be done independently as well, then it's entirely up to you what you do with it. One of the things we recommended was getting everybody on the bus. Now, I don't expect you to read all this, but basically what they're saying is they took it back and they involved everybody in the organisation. And they now have red days. They did a little groundwork. They put out a survey to find out what people wanted. They even involved the residents. And so what they have is they've actually made it a group. People have taken ownership of it. And so still to this day, they have Red Wednesdays, because the kit is red, that's our colour. That's why I'm in red today. And so consequently it's made it something that they can use, it's gone through the whole organisation, which is really important if you want culture change. So these are just some of the things that people have done with it. This is what it looks like. And hopefully now I'm going to show you just a little bit about it. So when you go to the page, you can register. Ken, why don't you come up here and register for me? Show them how easy it is. Okay. Fingers crossed.
Uh-oh. Not that easy. There's a tiny little keyboard behind here. It's not a normal keyboard.
We believe him, don't we?
And I've got big fat sausage fingers.
You can use anything you want. That's great. And don't worry about the RAC number. That's not relevant to you.
Where does you come in the alphabet?
There it is.
State?
No, you can ignore that one too. That's it. There you go. You got it wrong. Your password, it didn't like it. Probably needs to be a bit longer.
Got it.
Incorrect, yes.
There you go. Now you remember. That's all it takes. And probably you can do it quicker than Ken, but thank you, Ken. Yes, I'll give you this one. So now we're on Ken's. So what we have is the toolkit resources and some other bits and pieces. Keeping in mind that because we're no longer funded, we've just got very minimal involvement in it at the moment, but we're trying to keep it running so that people can still access the training. But I mean, the thing is there's likely to be things like this coming up. This is an idea in terms of how you might be able to train a critical mass of your staff in a very cheap, effective way, and then utilize what you have from the manual to then help them put that learning into practice. So the e-learning is up there. So the discs that you have, are exactly what's been uploaded here. And the only thing that I would say to you is that the one thing that's specific about this is if you're uploading the disc to a computer, then you have to finish the training on the computer, that computer. And if you're doing it on here, you can log in from anywhere, but it's the same as the disc. You have to complete it under the same name. It won't pick up where you left off if you're using a different name. So just keep that in mind. So we don't have it in here, so we're using. I'm going to call you Ken Baldy. That way we kill two. Baldy Ken, there we go. We'll just pretend. Now you're an other, and you're a male, and we'll say you're 35.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we'll put you down as a new user. So it gives you all the bits and pieces that you want to know about the DVD and what have you, but I just thought I'd show you a couple of things. And it'll be the same on the screen when you're looking at it. I'm sorry it's not very good on this particular thing. But
the Dementia Dynamics Toolkit. My name is Bernie McCarthy.
Yes, Bernie.
This training program is designed for anyone working in residential aged care and involved in the important and rewarding area of caring for people with dementia. The program contains a combination of the latest ideas about best practice dementia care, video and audio scenarios, interactive learning activities and case studies, presented in an interesting and accessible format that you can work through at your own pace. The program aims to improve your knowledge about dementia and provide you with new and useful ways to respond to behaviours of concern, or what is now called responsive behaviour.
Okay, Bernie.
You will have
Thanks. And so what you see here is there are 6 modules, and for each module you get a piece of the puzzle that provides a component of the person. So we've tried to keep that theme that the more you know, the more likely you are to know the person. I know it's corny, but we are Australian, what can I say? But it also is a bit of a challenge, and people quite like it because they get a piece of the puzzle, and everybody likes to have a win, don't they? That's the other thing. The training is set up very much so that you can have a win. So it's not, how can I say this? It's not something that you can fail at, because what we want is people to get the knowledge. So for example, if I go on and I'll do module 1, so you're getting a freebie here. And this will take us through the, excuse me, next. So I'm in module 1 and I've got a video. This is Marion.
Hello, my name's Marion Lennox. Well, I've not stayed in this hotel before, but well, I've stayed in lots of hotels, all around the world actually. My husband Bill and I, we love travelling, and we made many overseas trips. Italy, that was my favourite country. Wonderfully friendly people, and all those grand gardens, beautiful food. Yes. When I was young, I lived in the UK and later on in Canada, and well, I've stayed in several states in Australia, and in Broome, over in the west. Melbourne's my home now. I hope the food's good here. I'd better find reception and ask them to take my things to my room.
So it introduces Marion to them as a person with a history. So immediately they have a connection to somebody who they're going to learn about all of their learning throughout the the 6 modules will hang on Marion and her journey through. So each one is slightly different, and he'll talk a bit more. We love Bernie, but I've heard him for 4 years now. You can listen to him whenever you want. The nice thing is you can view your progress anytime. So you see, I've done 3 bits of module 1, and I've got 3 more bits to go. So at any point you can come out and go back in again, which is the nice thing. The personalizing practice, or the pop videos, these are the ones that we use in terms of the potential for you to use them as reflective learning.
Accept, don't label. In healthcare, we use labels to talk about care needs and the equipment we use, but sometimes these labels can be used to talk about the people we care for, such as she is a dementia or she is a vitamised. This reduces the person to being the disease or the care need, and we lose the rest of the person. Listen to your language during this shift and make an effort to use more person-sensitive language that reflects best practice. Take a moment to identify as a group what language you can improve during this shift.
So it's just a prompt for using what they're learning in the actual knowledge base to then put into practice. And you'd be amazed at how many of them say that quite often it's the first time they've had the opportunity to do that. And all up with a minute video and a couple of minutes of chat, you're devoting 3 minutes of a day to having something very powerful going on. Any comments, questions?
I think earlier we were reflecting that 30 years ago when I started my career journey, how far we'd come, because we'd do the tea round with a huge pot of tea, all with sugar in. Everybody took sugar.
Yes.
Everyone had a bath on a Wednesday.
Mm.
And although we've come very far, it's some people that have still been around for those 30 years that think they're doing things right.
Yeah.
And dementia care, interaction, personal-centred care has changed so much, but the culture doesn't tend to go with it. Mm-hmm. Something like this is culture changing, rather than having to do a course or having to do something that actually is gloss and not really changing the care that the individuals are getting.
That was the idea. The whole point was to make it something very practical for people to use, and because we have the evidence base for so much of this stuff, but as Norns was saying this morning, it seldom gets outside of the conferences, and when you do get it, it comes in a form that you can't use. And so this was about talking to the people on the ground and working with the people on the ground to give them something that would be useful. And we worked on the basis as if it would work in rural residential care facilities, it would work anywhere. Because it has to be affordable, because education is so hugely expensive now. So it has to be affordable. It has to be in a useful format that anybody in the facility, now this may get up the nose of some of your RNs, but having said that, and I can say this because I don't live here, is not all RNs know what they're doing when it comes to dementia care. So it's good for them to have a bit of a refresher as well. But the gardener, the maintenance man, the people who spend a lot of time with them, like the kitchen staff and the people who give them their drinks, and the personal carers. They can all, this is for anybody. And we always recommend that the board and the CEO do it as well, so that they know what's going on and they understand. And to involve the family, because we hear all the time, oh, that's all well and good, this stuff, but the family come in and they want mum up and they want her dressed and washed and sitting at the table having her breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning. And maybe mum just didn't want to get up that day, So it's about educating them as well. And so you can involve them in all this. And we've had some of them who've done this with their volunteers as well. So it's that kind, and you can pick and mix, So that's the idea: flexibility, utility, and functional. And then alongside that are all the manual components. So we go from, and they have nothing to do with the order of the modules, just so you know, because this is very much about, you know, what's the best way to use this? How can we facilitate culture change in a simple way by having everybody on the same page, and how we can support staff who are using the learning to then put that into practice. So we've got everything from introducing the toolkit and how to use the education all the way through to embedding sustainable, flexible practice. And it's not complicated language. It's very straightforward. And it's one of those dip in, dip out kinds of things. You know, you can use it when you need it. So instead of getting one of those, you can have everything that's in there off that. If it's going to help you at all, in any way, feel free to use it while it's still available. We're paid up till next year, so you've got at least 12 months to go for it, and hopefully we'll get some more funding and we'll update it and do it again. That's the problem. Without funding, we can't do anything. But the government has been incredibly generous in terms of enabling us to do this across the country. So that's the kit. Any other questions, comments? Yes?
How long would you expect that training to take?
Well, it's got 6 continuing professional development points attached to it in Australia, and that signifies that it's 6 hours worth of training. But it really depends on who's doing it and how you're doing it. If you're an independent and you want to pop along and do, you know, 2 or 3 modules at a go, or all 6, you could do it in a day. But if you want it spread out over time, or you're not particularly confident with your computer, it might take you longer. Like I said, some of them are using it as the basis for in-house training, so they're doing it over a period of time. Others, as you saw in some of the approaches to using it, they were doing it over a 2-day period, you know, a couple of hours one day and a couple of hours the next day. It's all about knowing what your staff are going to respond to the best. And that's why we highly recommend that you do involve your staff, like kind of introduce it to them and kind of say, this is what we'd like to use, what do you think, you know, how would you like to do it, that sort of thing. Give them a bit of ownership of it. Any other questions?
If I may go off at a slight tangent.
Certainly.
And ask a question related to research.
Yes.
You're from Australia.
Yes.
And I've understood recently that there is quite interesting research going on in Australia into the use of ultrasonic sound which can be used to destroy the plaques that form in the brain. I don't know whether you've heard of this, but I'd certainly heard it via someone else.
I heard about it at a conference I'm trying to think where it was. I think it was the American Alzheimer's Association conference in London earlier this year, because normally I'm not at conferences where they're offering a lot of medical stuff, because I'm interested in the care side of things. But they had some groundbreaking stuff there, and that was one of them. But I have to be honest, I can't for the life of me remember the name of the Australian team that was doing it. But you're right, that is going on, but it hasn't been published yet. That's my understanding. It came out at the conference. Yeah. Yeah.
It's another interesting development.
There's lots of different things going on, most definitely, and they're finding new things all the time. But you know, even if we found something tomorrow that's going to make a real difference, it's going to be 10 years before it really comes to fruition. And this is why it's so important for us. As much as, you know, there's the scientists doing that kind of stuff, at the moment, you know, there is no cure, and it's up to us who are involved in care to do the best that we can do. And even though we're all trying really hard, it's still not good enough. Yes.
So, Tom Kitwood started us on this journey of person-centred care and
Certainly did.
and personhood in the early 80s.
Yep.
So over 30 years later, we're still not getting it. So we all mean very well, but in residential care, it is still very task-orientated in my experience. So what is it that makes it so difficult to make that transition to meaningful person-centred care?
Well, I have to admit that the dominance of the medical model, from my perspective, is the biggest hurdle that we have, because it set the stage for everything that we do. And I'll be saying something a little bit towards the end about non-pharmacological interventions. I mean, just the language of it alone, you can tell that it's just an offshoot of the clinical approach. The problem is that it's like the physical environment. How we see how care should be provided is locked in to a cost-effective, for want of a better term, and probably to rankle you all and make you uncomfortable, a warehouse approach to caring for people, whether they have dementia or not. But given that caring for people with dementia is now core business for most care homes around the world, given that the population of residents has changed to that direction, we are now faced with, I think it really is, if we don't start making some significant change in the next 10 years, we will be having the same conversation 50 years from now. We have to break the mold. And there are people doing it, but there's only pockets of it. And it's going to take a push to really make the difference. So I'm sorry I can't be more positive.
Do you not think that won't change until society's attitude towards care changes in general, like you started with comments about the media and the way that nursing, residential homes particularly, are portrayed? Yep. We are still seen as very, very low-paid jobs. We are still recruiting people who have tried the hairdressing and beauty and that didn't work out. We are still not valued as a career of choice, and I think that's so important, because no matter how good your theory is and your policy and your training, you can only truly give person-centred care when you know the person. So you can only do that when you keep a stable staff team and you get to know your residents well, and you have the same staff caring for people over a long period of time, working as a team, working together. And until the profession is more highly valued, and I have to say that goes hand in hand with more highly paid, I think it's going to be very difficult to achieve those things.
Don't disagree with you at all. I think the thing is, though, is that it's up to us to start kicking back, just the way that people with dementia are kicking back. And Norms is doing his bit. We've got people like Norms all over the world who have said, we've had enough. You're not doing it right. You're not doing it well. And this is what you need to do. And we have the capacity, each of us, to say, this is not good enough. I spat the dummy at the Australian conference. Is that a term you know? Yeah. Oh, good. Suddenly looked like everybody glazed over. At the conference earlier this year, I was as annoyed as Norms was with the fact that this was, the same conversation was happening from the conference 2 years before that and 2 years before that. And they're all, saying the same thing, but nobody's actually doing anything about it. It's like, pull your finger out and let's start doing it. Say, no, we've had enough. We've absolutely had enough. And this is, we need to move this forward. And each of us in our own capacity have a role to play in that. This is for your previous question.
Thank you. I also think that until we start asking the people who we're giving care to and in partnership in care, because there's a lot of good intention, I know I was involved in designing the children's A&E here, and we were really keen on it being child focused, and architects and everyone, and yeah, children like portholes, but they put them at adult level. And it was only when children were involved in the mock-up design did we realise we'd got it wrong.
Absolutely.
And yet we would have told you that we had got the child in the centre or the client in the centre. And a bit like the red toilet seat, does it mean blood, does it mean fire? Well, ask.
Yeah.
Ask the people to whom it makes a difference.
Look, that is the issue that we have across the board in every country. Everybody has tokenism when they say they're involving people with dementia or they're involving the people. And it's tokenism. The kind of stuff, for example, that they're doing in Manchester with engaging older people and people with dementia in the research, not just developing it, but going out and helping with the research and advising on the policy stuff and involving not just the odd one token person, but getting a whole lot of people to provide their views. And it's like, do you guys have residence committees here in homes? 9 out of 10 times that's a rubber stamp or tokenism, and occasionally you might get the idea that filters through. That's if the organisation thinks it's a good idea and they can put it on their brochure.
Sorry, do you think part of the problem is that we're leaving everything too late and that people aren't being educated about these things at a younger age so that it's more of an accepted part within our society? So that if children are educated and younger adults are educated, things will be looked at differently just as society progresses?
I think some of the younger people have got a better handle on how to be with people with dementia than older people do, like your age, not my age. But the other thing is you're all professionals in here. You've all had some kind of professional education, haven't you? Did you get anything on older people and dementia other than in a clinical context at all? This is what I mean by the education system lets us down. These are the people who are our primary customers. They are the people who are going to require our support, and we're not educating people who are in those disciplines and in those services in the right way. Yes?
I'm quite a firm believer of the advanced care plan, and sorry, I'm loud. So I did a paper on a research model into advanced care planning, the pitfalls that the country has in non-effective advanced care planning. So I was quite interested in the talk that was done earlier on. My findings, although it was only about 10 papers I reviewed, was that the advanced care plans aren't done well enough, if they're done at all. So you're not going to have person-centred care 8 to 10 years down the line when perhaps family ties are broken, people have passed away. So I think the problem is right at the beginning of early stage diagnosis for us to actually start implementing person-centred care, for it to be continuous all the way through the care pathway.
I take that a step further, and I think that should be what we do all the time, not just when you get a diagnosis. It should be all the time. Children should be if they go to the dentist or the doctor, they should be treated as a person. If you're in the hospital, you should be treated as a person first. It should always be the person first. As far as advanced care directors, when I was head of discipline for palliative and supportive services at Flinders, we did a national survey, and I have to tell you, health professionals were the worst people for not having an advanced care plan. Like, you got to practice what you preach, folks. You know?
And there's something about implementing person-centred care that makes it not person-centred. You can't. It's got to be a behaviour. It's got to come from the heart. It's an attitude. It's not something. A process that you implement.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of work on emotional intelligence. I mean, there are some people who you just shouldn't let near anybody who requires care. But having said that, I think the principles of person-centered care can be taught to anybody. And you can teach them how to respect people. Fundamentally, you can teach them those things, but we can't teach people that and then tell them they can do it if they have time. That's the issue.
I think one of the things that was mentioned before was about how do we get it right and why we're still not getting it right. And I think one of the things that, for me...
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I'm looking around.
I think one of the things that I've picked up on, and it goes back to about the colour of the toilet seat to colour of what people eat off and what's best practice, it's about the regulator and what they think. Because I think I've just had a not so good inspection report where I had an inspector go on about baby gates and not having a bench attached to the wall and navigating risk, but then equally a lot of the coloured crockery that would use in the care home is actually plastic, and they actually pick up on you using plastic and bringing that into treating our people with dementia and child. So I think it's about, one of the things for me, it's about getting the regulator right, because a lot of the driving force behind care and care homes is about what the regulator thinks, and you can get two care homes identical, two different inspectors, two different outcomes.
We have the same complaint in Australia, but I think things are changing. I mean, you guys introduced Sophie over here, right? And we never had that, but you never had that before. And we now have in Australia the license for Sophie, and are using Sophie too. And we actually did this training with all of their surveyors. So we had about 400 surveyors do this, and we did workshops with them as well. But what we get this complaint a lot in the workshops that we do, and I sympathise with this. But we've also had people stand up and say, but the thing is, and I don't know what it's like here, but in Australia, there's a funding instrument, and then there's the accreditation. And the funding instrument is what drives them to plan. And the accreditation, they only kick into gear, when their time's right. To the point now where they're going to start doing spot inspections all the time. They're not even going to announce their regular visit anymore. So, it's the issue is we have to have proper surveyors. We have to have professional people who are well trained and not just. I mean, the training that the Australians give, I think, is pretty limited. So that's where you're getting your variation. But it's the same as. Do you guys have it whereby, you go in the morning and you know who's been on the shift before you? Right? The variability, and this is what we have to try, and we have to start getting people on the same page. Yeah. Norms, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was about what was mentioned about, I think it's that time of day.
Sorry.
It's all right. Yeah, one of the things was the colours of the plates and things like that. I certainly agree, and that's something that I will be taking up with Andrew at CQC, because if that's happening, it shouldn't. You know what I mean? Because we're recommending certain things, and it's not happening, and especially if you get different inspections, that's just not fair on you guys. It's as simple as that. So I will be giving a strong letter to Andrea sometime after the new year to find out why this is happening and find out what we can do about it. And the other thing was, people talk about involving people with dementia. Then we came out with the slogan, the Purple Angel, which was help us to help you to help us. Eventually we're going to be in your care. So if you come to us and ask us how we'd like it, how we'd like to see our care in the future, and how we want to make sure that everything's right and in place, if you help us to help you, eventually you'll be helping us. Does that make sense? Yeah? Help us to help you.
And that's a very, very good point. I dropped an exercise this afternoon because of the time factor, but we do an exercise in our workshops where we ask people to make a list on the basis of their professional perspective of what they would see as key features in a residential aged care home. And so they make the list. And then we ask them what they would be looking for their parents or grandparents, and we make another list. And then we ask them what they would like for themselves, and we make another list. And those lists don't look anything alike. So, and yeah, exactly.
It really hits home to the carers how much we would expect, and sometimes actually the extra we could be giving on a daily basis.
Yeah, and the thing is that that's where those three perspectives I was talking about earlier come into play. If we don't understand each other's perspectives, we're never going to get to the what Norm's talking about in terms of being able to provide the actual needs that are required or preferred, if you will.
We was involved in the redesign of Cheetham Hill. We was walk around to have a look at Cheetham Hill, and we give our advice as a person with dementia, and a carer and my wife on the Cheetham Hill ward here, and that is a perfect example of involving not only the person with dementia but the carer as well. The information's there; it's free. You've only got to ask.
That's exactly right.
We come, families. They need education because we come across a lot of resistance, or we'll have a brother and a sister who don't agree with the care. So we have to say, well, we're actually caring for your mom, not either one of you. And I think that often families get in the way of good care because they want mom in bed at this time, but mom doesn't want to go to bed. So we've dealt with quite a lot of that. So I've spoken to our trainer, and she's going to come in. We're going to do an evening session with drinks and that, and have like a support group so they can all, and her husband has dementia, frontal lobal, so he will probably come along just so we can educate families, because often we are battling against, or we're caught in the middle. So the son's saying this, the daughter's saying this, and we don't know which way to go. So we have to stand back and say, actually, we'll put in mom. We're doing what mom wants, not what you want, and not what your sister wants. So that I think families need to be educated. We have some families who can't deal with dementia, so they never ever visit. They never visit their families, and it's logged in the care plan that they can't face it. They can't face the person, and that's really quite hard for us to.
I think what we have to remember too, though, is how many people have ever been inside a care home before a loved one requires it. What do they know about what care homes are like? They read the newspapers, they see the news, and what does that tell us? That they're horrible places to go, that they're places to go and die, not live. It's all the doom and gloom, and then we fully expect them to understand what we do to care for the people they love. So, fundamentally, you cannot expect family to understand what is good practice and what isn't if they have no understanding. All they care about is that mum or dad or whoever is being taken care of. So on the one hand, yes, I think education is important. Knowledge, perhaps, as opposed to education. And an understanding and involving them rather than looking at them as barriers. Look at them as somebody who, if they're interested in being part of that person's life, then show them ways that they continue to be involved. There's lots of things that we can do to have family involved and make family feel confident with people with dementia, because a lot of them aren't confident either. But I don't think we can call them barriers to care. I really don't, because I think that comes across as a professional taking a particular stance. You're in my way, you're not letting me do my job. So I'm going to educate you, and then you won't be in my way anymore, as opposed to saying, come along, join us, What are your needs? You know, how can we help you better understand what's going on here?
I think sometimes it's that loss of their loved one, which makes them feel like this.
It's the loss of their loved one because it's no longer their mother or their father, and it's just so difficult to deal with. My auntie, my grandfather, her father, actually had a stroke. I know it's not dementia, but it's the same thing. Had a stroke in her house. He lived in her house, and she couldn't go past the doorway because that wasn't her father anymore. So I think sometimes it is the emotional side.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many. I mean, we're not talking about things here that are simple. We're talking about things that are incredibly complex here, and there's lots of sides to it. The thing that we can focus on are the things that we can do. And that's around, if we can just start on the same page and be respectful and have all those principles. If I can move on in case you have any more questions. That you've been talking. Okay.
Hi, yeah. I work in domiciliary care, so it's a different side to the residential care. At the original assessment, the initial assessment, we always go to the house, obviously do a risk assessment, X, Y, Z, work out the tasks that are required. But also within that care plan, we have a page that says what is important to me. And that starts from their religion to their hobbies and interests, what they like to do on a daily basis. Not as far as advanced care planning, but getting to know that individual, a talking point for the individual carers. And then every night at the end of every visit, we write up the notes so the next care worker can sort of take on from that thing. So it was just another side to care.
Yeah, and having that, having that knowledge and B, passing it on is important. What we have found is there's a lot of places have life stories, but they don't actually use them in the care planning. You know, they know a lot about them, but they don't actually use it in the care planning. Or they have bitty stories and they latch onto a few things that the family have told them and then wonder why the person isn't particularly happy with anything. Years ago, when I was doing my PhD, I spent 9 months in a couple of residential aged care homes doing observations. And one day I was watching this was up in Aberdeen, and I was watching one of the kitchen staff go round with a young 16-year-old who had just started there as part of their kitchen team, and she was telling her, you know, you go around every day at lunchtime and you ask them what they would like for lunch. Would they like this or this? And so the young girl got to a woman who, quite frankly, I'd been told was away with the fairies. That's how they put it to me, as often sometimes they do. And the young girl said to her, would you like, it was rice pudding or jelly? Would you like rice pudding or jelly? And she didn't say anything. The older kitchen staff said, oh, she'll have rice pudding. She likes rice pudding. And so the girl didn't say anything. She wrote it down. Would you like tea or coffee? She didn't say anything. And the young girl said, she said, oh, the older worker said, oh, she'll have a coffee. That's what she likes. And the girl said to her, how do you know that? And she said, well, she always has coffee. And the young girl said, you know, without skipping a beat, well, how do you know, maybe she doesn't want coffee today. And this woman who was supposed to be away with the fairy said, aye, and you can keep that slop you call coffee. I'll have a cup of tea. You know, so the other thing we find, and the point of that story is, I find that life stories seem to stop when they come in the door. And talk about writing them off. I mean, their life stories continue because everything that happens in that new environment is going to impact on their life story. And so consequently, that life story should be a static thing, and therefore you shouldn't be given a cup of coffee every day just because you liked it when you first came in. God forbid, I have to say, if somebody didn't give me a decent latte of a morning, I'd be pretty cranky. This is the thing, is it is very hard to change. And we do things in the name of experience. We also deny things in the name of experience. Because I've often heard, somebody say, oh yeah, well, we tried that with Mr. Smith, but it didn't work. Well, when did you try that? Oh, 2 years ago. Really? Okay, maybe we could try it again then. So it is very, very difficult to change. But Gian Power is a really interesting bloke. He's very good friends with Richard Taylor, who has been another advocate for dementia. A person with dementia, a very articulate man like Norm's. But Gian Power is a geriatrician in the States. And his work is saying we need new ways of thinking. And I think this is the kind of thing that we need in terms of moving forward. He talks about a well-being framework, and that it's useful not just for every day, but as a way of understanding how people communicate. And he goes from calling it behavior or responsive behavior or challenging behavior to expressions of distress. And the reason language is so important is because the language dictates how we respond to things. So by calling it distress, it doesn't become something that's carved in stone for the disease. Distress means that something's not right, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's because the person has dementia. It just means that probably because they have dementia, they may not be able to express it in a different way. So he refers to the distress being the symptom, not the cause. And in his book, he talks about, if somebody had pneumonia, you wouldn't be treating them with cough syrup because they had a cough. I think that's a beautiful way to think about it, because as long as we don't have a treatment or a cure for dementia, we have to be innovative in the way that we support people with dementia. He refers to non-pharmacological interventions as bringing the person back to what we think is right, what we think is best, not what they want. And the reason is because we tend to come from that deficit approach. So everything's, they have dementia, and so therefore they can't do this, or this, or they won't be able to do this, or this. And we need to use the strengths-based approach and build on and support what they can do. And he talks about non-pharmacological interventions in this way. And I think this is really important. We tend to use them like a prescription. And I've had nurses at workshops say to me, well, I don't understand why people can't get it. You make a list of things that makes them happy, and then you just use that particular thing when this happens, and use this particular thing when that happens. I mean, they're people. They're human beings. And every day is going to be different. Every hour is going to be different. Every minute is going to be different. And God forbid that we should all live lives that were routined and regimented to the point where there's a list of things that somebody can do for you. I don't think any of you would be very happy with that. They are not person-directed. They are treated like a dose of pills, so they're like a prescription. It doesn't mean that they're not good. This is the way that we utilize these sorts of things. They're superimposed, and this is the one that gets to your question. They're superimposed on the usual living environment and approaches to care. So the context of that unmet need isn't there. We try to put things into our existing context. We need to kind of throw out the rule book and think of things a slightly different way. I'm not suggesting we throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we need to throw out the rule book and say, okay, if we had a blank slate, how would we do this? What would we do? And they're not tied to the domains of well-being. And he has identified 7. And they're not dissimilar to Kitwood's flower and that sort of thing, but identity, connectedness, security, autonomy, meaning, growth, and joy. We need, all of us need those things in our life. And to think that a person with dementia can't grow is a gross misconception. Gross misconception. So what we need to do is exactly what you were saying. We need to listen to the true experts. The only people who are experts at dementia are the people who are living with dementia. The rest of us are just ad hoc to that. Behaviours are expressions of distress, so we're changing our language. Abandon the assumption of incapacity. How dare we, as a group of people who have cognitive capacity, suggest that somebody else has an incapacity just on the basis of having a disease? We don't do that with people with cancer. We don't do that with people with heart disease. And I know it's a brain disease, but my point is that we make assumptions, and we shouldn't. And we have to embrace this idea of a negotiated risk to facilitate engagement and autonomy. One of the reasons when you do walk into a nursing home that has a bunch of people asleep in chairs around the telly is because they're bored out of their mind, because all the risk has been taken out of their lives. If you weren't allowed out of your living room except to go to bed or to go to the kitchen to have dinner, you would be Looney Tunes within a couple of weeks. And we expect people to live their lives like that, certainly the last couple of years if they go into a residential aged care facility. So where to from here? What's in a name that we call a rose by any other name would swell as sweet? Language is important. It does matter what you say. It does matter how you call it. It does matter because it feeds how we think. It feeds our attitudes. And so consequently, it's up to each and every one of us to do something about it. So we can always look for the positive first. That's a good place to start. What is that person's strength? What is good for them? Be conscious of what you are saying. Make sure you're always reflecting. Just be that little voice in your own head. Be conscious of what you're doing. We do things as a matter of routine, and we don't realize the impact that we have on others. We're not very good at being human beings sometimes, you know that? Like, we kind of got to get back in the game with some of this stuff. We have to be reflective, because if you're not reflective on what you're doing and what you're saying, you're not going to change. You're also not going to come up with those new ideas that we need, because the new ideas are all out here. We have to have a new goal. Strike for well-being. Some people may not live well. Some people may think they are living well. But well-being should be our goal. Not reducing behaviors or that sort of thing. It should be well-being. Do that positive person work. When I was, I'm going to close with a story. When I was in that 457-bed residential aged care home in Canada, one of the first things they asked me to have a look at was the people who were bedbound. Now we're talking 35 years ago. It's a long time ago. And they had 26 people who hadn't been out of bed for 6 months, which I suppose, given that there was 457 people in it, was probably not that big of an average, but it was a lot of people. So I read about a program that was being run out west in Calgary by a bloke who's still around somewhere called Mark Novak. And it was called Life Enrichment for Extended Care Patients, because that's what we called them in Canada back many years ago, extended care patients. And it was a very simple program. It was about just communicating with somebody on the basis of something that was of interest to them, and expect nothing in return. No response, nothing. So I thought, oh, I'll have a bash at that. I'm young, keen, you know, I'll have a go. So I did, and I made up a schedule for 3 months. And I went along, and I would spend 5 minutes every other day with these 26 people. And the staff were like, oh, you know, what are you wasting your time for? They're vegetables, you know. They had all that stuff going on. And back then they didn't think twice about using that kind of language. And I said, well, I just want to try it, you know. It's not taking any of your time, it's my time, I'll give it a go. So that was fine. I had a couple of wins. You know, I had a guy who loved boxing, and I took in a tape recording of a boxing match and played it for him, and he brightened up, and next day he was glad to see me. And so there's little things like that going on. Then I went on holiday for 2 weeks. And when I came back, I was absolutely astonished because people who I had been talking to were now out of bed. The staff, while I was gone, had taken it upon themselves to move in and carry on. Now, I don't care how many years go past. Oh, it makes me cry. I cannot believe that those people didn't have a better quality of life because the staff changed the way they were thinking about them and took the trouble to move them, to just to put their chair by a window, to engage with them as if they were real people. I didn't do that, the staff did. So each of us have the opportunity to be that little pebble that you drop in the water and it goes out. Each of us can do something that's going to make a difference. Thank you.